Okay, welcome everybody to our webinar this morning. My name is Matthew Taylor, and during this webinar, we're going to be looking back at the last 12 months and the wonderful conservation impact we've been able to have despite COVID. My name is Matthew Taylor. I'm joining you from the northern beaches of Sydney, and I'm honoured to be on the ancestral lands of the Gai Mariegal people. And I'd like to acknowledge the first Australians as the traditional custodians of this amazing land, who've been caring for country over many millennia, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders of the community, past, present, and emerging. So for the conversation today, I'm joined by our CEO, Heather Campbell, our Executive Manager, Science and Conservation, Rebecca Spindler, and the wonderful Paul Hales from Northern Queensland, who's our Landscape Manager for the arid riverine. So before we start, a couple of housekeeping things. We're going to have some questions, and we've got time for that at the end. If you'd like to put your questions into the chat as we go along, please do so. There'll be a chat button at the bottom. And we're also going to be recording this webinar so that it's available if you can't stay to the end, and also if you've got people you'd like to send it on to. So each year at Bush Heritage, we produce an impact report where we pull together the various stories, the activities, and the outcomes over the past year. Part of this is the formal governance and financial reporting that's required by all organizations, particularly the larger ones. And we put that into a formal report, which you can access via a link that we'll put up in the chat. But today we want to focus on the stories, the images, and the exciting things that have been happening towards achieving our mission of healthy country protected forever. Okay, now I'm hoping we can get some pictures up for you shortly. Here we go, fantastic.
Hi, I'm standing here today on Tangerong country, about an hour north of Melbourne, on Bush Heritage's 37th Reserve, the Roundhouse. Acquiring the Roundhouse was one of the many successes in a year that confronted us with more challenges than most. It has been inspiring to watch Bush Heritage's staff, partners, volunteers and supporters respond to these challenges with determination and commitment. The pandemic opened our eyes to the potential of the digital world to connect, to share knowledge and to innovate. Bush Heritage's fire team used online platforms to provide remote technical support to Aboriginal rangers conducting prescribed burning programs across Northern Australia. A record number of people tuned into the first virtual Women in Conservation Breakfast, which we co-host annually with Trust for Nature. Importantly, our field-based conservation work was able to continue with minimal interruption, because so many of our staff live on or close to our reserves. On Edgbaston Reserve in central Queensland, we released captive-bred red-finned blue-eyed fish into the wild, providing a much-needed population boost to a species that was on the brink of extinction. Researchers trapped endangered red-tailed phascogales on one of our southwest reserves to help us understand their genetic diversity. And we harvested native grass seed from our Carnarvon Reserve, Bajara country in Queensland, to rehabilitate cleared and degraded grasslands in the surrounding region. These achievements wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for your extraordinary support. If 2020 has taught us anything, it's together we can be an amazing force for good and a force for nature. Thank you for being part of our story and for helping us to make 2020 such a successful year. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thanks for sticking with us, folks. A small technical glitch just to kick off with. Just to recap, my name's Matthew Taylor, and today we're going to be looking at our impact report. And that was our CEO, Heather Campbell, doing a highlights from the year, which has been an incredible year, despite all the things that's happened to us. We've actually called this webinar Resilient Together, because Australia is one of those countries that requires quite a bit of resilience to survive its droughts, the fires, some occasional mouse plagues, which we've been having in New South Wales. And of course, we've all had to cope with our very own plague, COVID. So despite the challenges of lockdowns, Bush Heritage has had a very successful year. And over the next 40 minutes or so, we'll talk to the team about some of those amazing stories. So we've had the first video, so let's crack on. What I was going to ask, first of all, to our panel was really, we've been through the ringer a bit in the last 12 to 18 months. It's been an interesting time. It'd be great to hear what the experience has been of each of you in terms of what you feel this year's been about. And we're going to chuck up some slides while you're talking. This first section, those slides don't necessarily link to what the presenters say, because I don't know what they're going to say. But over to you, perhaps, Heather, for give us an impression.
Thanks a lot, Matthew. And it's great to see everybody or be able to connect into this in with people this way. So I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri country, so on the edge of the Yarra Valley, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And my heart goes out to everybody through the past year that has been through the ups and downs of lockdowns and restrictions and not being able to visit friends and family. And I know that's impacted many people. And for those in Sydney, I know you're in extended lockdown in New South Wales. For those of us in Melbourne, I think we're up to lockdown number 6. And I think everybody's over it. But what was fantastic about this last year was through all of it, the work kept being done. We've had amazing teams on the ground, even though we haven't been able to have our volunteers go across state boundaries or borders. We've actually had our volunteers working really hard within the different states. We've been rebounding from fire, and you can see the image across the back of my shoulder. That's a couple of weeks after the Barren fire, but now when I look at photos, it's a carpet of green. And so we're seeing the environment rebound. We've also done an amazing amount of fire training, cultural burning, 4-wheel drive training, remote first aid. A lot of that work has continued, all the planting work. It's just been phenomenal to see all of the amazing achievements from the last year. And big thank you to staff, our donors, our supporters, for just making it possible, and for the environment giving us hope during these joys and challenges of COVID.
Thanks, Heather. And, it's been different for all the staff, hasn't it? Beck, what's it been like for you and your team?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So just a bit of context, I'm in Sydney, and the rest of my team, who are largely office-based, have all been in Melbourne and suffering the rounds of lockdown with everybody else. And I think the overwhelming emotion at the moment is just gratitude that we work for Bush Heritage. And I think because we are spread across the country, we've been working with online meetings and connecting remotely with the vast majority of our staff out on field for many years. And so thankfully we were really nimble. We had the opportunity, we had the technology really to be able to link in and make sure each other was supported. And Bush Heritage is a bit like a big family. You really do support one another and find that everybody is there for each other, regardless of where they are in the country, and talking through everything. We've established a very informal catch up with my team, where we've managed to find out a lot more about each other personally and have a good laugh and have a bit of a pressure release. But I would like to tell you just one really quick story that illustrates so clearly and keenly how we're connected to people on the ground, like Paul doing the hard yards out in the field. We call the impact report impact for a reason. We don't just tell you how many trees we plant. We don't tell you how much weeding we've done. We tell you the impact, the end of the story. And this is the season where most of that recording and reporting and ecological work is done out on ground. The people in my team are the ones that are responsible for seeing that data and analysing it and pulling it through. We've just been developing a new system, and in the last few weeks we had a huge celebration, because while people were going out in the field, analysing the data, looking at the plants, looking at the animals, putting all of the information into a system, that was flowing in real time to our systems in the Melbourne office, and that I could access in Sydney as well. So we can look at that now from anywhere in the country, and you could see the data fields just populating all the way through these things, which I know you guys might not be quite as geeky as I am, but to me it felt like water coming down the Cudderborough Creek. It was just so exciting to see that real-time data flowing into the system, and real-time celebrations too, with the ecologists out in the field and my team in Melbourne. And across Sydney. It was just absolutely fantastic. So we do feel really connected, and again, really grateful that Bush Heritage places a priority on that wherever you are.
Thanks, Beck. That's really good to know. And now we must cross to Paul, of course, because we're all very jealous, us office-based people, of the fact that you can actually be out on the land, Paul. So what's it been like for you?
Oh yeah, look, Queensland probably obviously hasn't felt the effects the same as the southern states. We've been very, very lucky and very thankful for that. We've had a few minor hiccups with sort of Cairns and Brisbane, but hasn't really affected us. So staff have been very good. Queensland Health's been very good lately at getting our COVID shots into remote areas like Baduri and Boyer and up to Mount Isa, which has let our staff take advantage of that and then allow them to travel as well and keep doing their work. Really, the minor impacts for us have been, staff that have had to go to New South Wales or new staff that are now a bit stuck behind borders. But having said that, it's an inconvenience. But at the same time, we really haven't had any health issues amongst staff or partners, which has been we're all very thankful for. And work on the ground has continued. We've managed to keep ourselves a fairly self-contained unit, I suppose, with support staff and field staff in Queensland. So we're still getting through weed work and feral work with the help of some volunteers like CWM. And our fire staff have been travelling around the state, especially to myself at Yorker and to Carnarvon, and still managed to get through our prescribed burns in a year that's looking relatively mild at the moment, which is very good. But yeah, for us, we've been very lucky. It has been probably a case of business as usual, really. But certainly also, as Beck said, the ability to use Zoom or Teams has been a great thing for everyone to stay connected throughout the organisation. And hopefully, fingers crossed, current trend sort of continues the way it's going for us up here as well.
Fantastic. Well, one of the ongoing challenges of COVID-19, of course, is that we've all missed connecting with you guys out there in the traditional ways. But Heather, I know you'll agree that we've been really blown away by the continued commitment from our supporters and our partners in terms of supporting us to do our valuable work.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. I think this year has really shown us that even though we can't physically get together, and so many of us, we just love to give somebody a hug or see somebody in 3 dimensions, being able to continue to have those conversations. And it's been a year about partnerships and support. And I've just loved the many conversations that I've had with donors and supporters over the phone while I'm standing, in my backyard in the trees and listening to the birds, and they're listening to theirs in their backyard. And that support has been phenomenal. We've had, one of the most, I was going to say successful, it's a bit of a weird way to say this, but as we came out of the fires and the challenges of COVID, all of you as donors, supporters, volunteers and partners have stuck with us, have said actually the environment's super critical, and we've obviously seen all the news from the IPCC reports, etc., that we have to just get on and actually do things. And so our donors, our supporters have really supported us through doing that, which has been absolutely phenomenal. And just the correspondence has been great. And so we've had things that we've had to change, new ways of doing things. So the Women in Conservation breakfast for the first time went virtual, but that meant that we could reach almost 1,000 people. We had people dialing in from Europe, from the US, from all over Australia, connecting in with people from within the different states of Australia and all over the place. And so it was great to actually have that ability to connect in that way. We've also seen amazing generosity come through. And one of those that some of you may have heard about is the Roundhouse. So one of our long-term supporters and a volunteer in our office, Annalie Holden, gifted us the Roundhouse. So it's about an hour out of Melbourne. And it's this glorious property up on Tangerong country where you can sit out and you see views from 270 degrees. So not quite 360, but you can see from the Macedon Ranges through to Mount Buller. You can see the fragmented landscape, and it really helps reinforce that need to reconnect the landscape, to have those stepping stones for species, to have those areas where species can move as the world gets hotter. So a big, big thank you to everybody for the amazing support this last year, for the emails, for the phone calls, for the, dropping questions to us and, engaging with us and being able to connect. And we're really looking forward to, once we're all vaccinated, so please go out and get your jab, to being able to connect back face to face, have people back out on the different reserves, and to be able to stand there, particularly in this time of the year in spring, where you can see the carpets of flowers occur. And for those in Western Australia who are dialing in, you've got an amazing wildflower season at the moment. So please go out there and enjoy it and take lots of photos and videos and share them with us, because over here in the east, we're really super jealous, but we're really glad that you can get out and enjoy it. So thank you for all of your support and all your generosity.
Yes, that support certainly ensured we can continue the important work of returning the bush to good health, hasn't it? And including advocating for protection of very important landscapes. And that's one of the things I'd love to talk a bit more about, which is we've celebrated a couple of wins recently. In Queensland, we've had a new designation, a special wildlife reserve for our Pullen Reserve. And there's also been a new Indigenous protected area in central New South Wales. Paul, can you talk to us about Pullen and what that means for us, that special designation from the government?
Yeah, no worries, Matt. So the Special Wildlife Reserve legislation that's only just passed is peculiar to Queensland only. So we've been very lucky to have that. It gives us, those private conservation areas, the same level of protection as government-owned gazetted national parks. So in the past, we've always gone down the route of nature refuges, which has been a level of protection, but still didn't protect us from mining or forestry activities in those areas where it was able to be done. But this one now is great. Obviously, we can now confidently know that we're not going to have other extractive industries come in over the top of us as well. Pullen being the first one off the list, and then looking at moving to Edgbaston and Yorker and Carnarvon, with the only hold up being for those ones where we've got mining leases or exploration leases. We need to wait for those to be extinguished before we can move forward. But certainly other properties are in the pipeline for this designation as well, or gazettal. And some of those are extending areas from national parks as well. So they're not islands. So they'll have the same level of protection right from national parks boundaries out to our boundaries as well. So really a lot of work. Kudos to Bush Heritage Managers, Rob Murphy, that have been heavily involved in getting that legislation through and talking to government as well. Certainly a feather in our cap to assist with that level of protection in this state. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned it was a case of it's only true for Queensland because of our, federal different rules in different states. But Heather, do you think there's potential for other reserves to be designated special wildlife reserves in Queensland? And does this lead the way in Australia, perhaps, for other states to come on board with better protection?
Thanks, Matt. Look, and certainly from our perspective in Bush Heritage, we would be looking, for having all of our Queensland ones ultimately with that level of protection. As Paul said, we need to work with the government to extinguish some of those mining tenements, which in most cases often only take up small parts of the property. So that's a process we have to work through. But to be able to get through and have that very first one being Pullen is absolutely fantastic, and we've shown we can do it. So I'm really looking forward to progressing with the rest. As far as the rest of Australia, as we know, we're a federated structure, and some states are a bit more progressive than others. We'd love to see this model elsewhere, but we know we have some specific challenges within some states. But we're going to keep pushing to, as our vision says, healthy country protected forever. So very much pushing that we can get the government and the legislative regulatory support to be able to do that across Australia. Yeah,
fantastic. Now, Beck, we recently, which was great, had an Indigenous protected area announced for Mwanga in New South Wales. And I'd love to hear what role Bush Heritage played in supporting that process, because I think it speaks to our partnership with traditional owners across the country, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. And really, first, a huge congratulations to the Niyampawongamon people who have been working towards this IPA determination for over a decade, really. They managed to purchase the property in 2011 with a combination of National Reserve System funding, which is now defunct, and actually the same way that Heritage paid for a lot of our reserves during that growth period, the National Reserve System, now Indigenous Land and Sea Council. And they've been working really closely with our most amazing Sarah Eccles, who's our Aboriginal Engagement Officer down in the southeast, to make sure that they were able to put through the purchase and develop a land management plan, and then develop the IPA, which has just been announced and is so incredibly exciting. But they have been managing that property just as though it was a national park. And you point out that bush heritage reserves are the same. We don't have that same blanket level of protection that eliminates mining and forestry activity. You have to work with every new application as they come along. The Mwanga have been, the Nyampa Wongabon people have been working around that on Mwanga for the last 10 years, and the property is looking absolutely fantastic. You know, they've destocked, they've done lots of weed work. The outcomes and the things that we care about, the conservation and cultural targets on that area are just looking absolutely fantastic. So they manage it just as we do the rest of our reserves to that level of protection, even though we don't have that blanket protection in the first instance.
Fantastic. Yes, I'm very looking forward to the opportunity to go and visit on country at some point, see what they've been doing. Another thing, Beck, I wanted to ask you about is bush heritage prides itself on being quite an innovative leader in the protection of native species and, of course, caring for the habitat that they live in. We've had some successes recently, haven't we, in translocating some captive-bred species and seeing some work really come to fruition. And it's that glorious, glamorous little thing, the red-fin blue-eye, which is one of my favourites. Do tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll probably leave the red-fin blue-eye to Paul, but one that does spring to mind is the red-tailed phascogale out in the southwest of WA. And when you say recent, you know, all of the conservation gains take years and years of work. We actually translocated a population working with the DBCA over in WA, translated a population onto Kojonup about 10 years ago, and they've been absolutely thriving since then. So while our incidental observations are telling us that the population is probably doing fine, we wanted to make sure that we caught them up, did some recapture analysis and understand the numbers in the population, but even more importantly, catch them up and take a small skin sample so that we could look at the genetics of the population and make sure that we have an appropriate mix of the founders, because you do often lose the genetic representation of the animals that you translocate them whenever you translocate them to anywhere new. So we just want to make sure that we've got enough founder representation in the current population, and that tells us whether we need to do a new translocation or even a swap of animals with another population across WA. But so far the results are looking fantastic, and thanks to our university collaborators as well as the internal bush heritage ecologists and the students that have been working on that project, it's really exciting and I can't wait to see the results.
That's a great story. And Paul, yes, I jumped the gun there. Paul, can you talk to us about the red-fin blue eyes?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. So Heather mentioned before that we translocated. So we translocated about 27 fish earlier this year into one of the springs on Edgbaston that had been fenced and excluded by some of our exclusion fence, so a heavy shade cloth, which allows water through, but not any of the other feral fish species. So they were released into that quite successfully. And within 3 weeks, we had small fish, like dozens and dozens and dozens in that spring. So they've repopulated it quite well. So we've got lots of hope for those ones in the future. They were checked again just last week, and the numbers seem really, really good. There's no evidence of any feral fish in there. And what the captive breeding process has shown us is that the red fins, they breed quite well if you can remove the predatory species and take away that competition. We have fenced 2 more springs just in the last few weeks, thanks to volunteers and a lot of hard work on Edgy. So we've got 2 more springs ready to go very soon, and are working with University of Queensland and others to look at the physiology of the captive-bred fish as compared to the wild ones. As Beck said, if moving fish around and breeding, you can lose some genetics. So they're looking for us, looking at the adaptability. Are we losing any genetics that might help the captive-bred fish survive as well as the wild ones? So exciting bit of information to see back, just to see how that goes and how that might change plans in the future, but certainly looking positive at the moment, but just waiting for those results to come back to us now. But certainly quite a strong volunteer presence on Edgy as well, which is helping us with feral fish removal and fencing. So the future of the redfin's looking quite good on site at Edgy at the moment, which is it's a great thing for it's a credit to everyone that's been involved with the project. Thanks, Matt.
It's a great story, and I love the fact that exclusion fencing, when we normally talk about it, is usually 3 meters high, chain link, electric wires across the top, and it's there to exclude foxes and cats. But in your case, it's approximately 50 centimeters high, shade cloth, and at a much different scale, isn't it? And one of those things that is there to keep the fish out that you don't want. Excellent. Well, I'd like to, a very topical subject, like to talk now about climate change, because that's something that Bush Heritage has had to take very seriously as we look to the future and consider where we need to put our efforts to ensure that all the great work we've already done and the work we're planning to do is going to make a difference. In terms of our response organisationally, what sort of progress has the Green team been making in this space, Beck?
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, we've known about climate change and in a broad sense for a long time. We had a pretty serious wake-up call a few years ago, and this landscape that you're looking at now is Nadu Hills down in central Victoria, where we had a significant tree die-off event that followed a drought and then a significant jump up in temperature over a period of about 5 days. And that led to a mass tree die-off on a couple of different hillsides across Nadu Hills, and really difficult time in being able to recruit new trees into those areas for a number of different reasons. We established a really extensive project down in the southeast with an amazing volunteer coordinator who's Gary McDonald, who's actually a professor at Melbourne University, but has helped us design this incredible project where we took the same species but looked at genetic stock, different of those species from around southern Australia, kind of climates that we expect Nadu Hills to see over the next few decades. We've taken those seeds, we've grown them up through the nursery in the local area, and made sure that we've designed it in a way that we can tell the differential impacts of the provenance of the seed, the kind of landscape it's on, the aspect of the hill. You know, the experimental design in this thing was really quite phenomenal. And Gary and Matt Appleby and the team in the southeast have just done such an incredible job in doing this. I got to go out and do the second year monitoring for all of this, and every single one of those plants you see right there has a QR code with all of the information about where that tree came from, the genetic stock, and we're monitoring every single year to figure out how well they're recruiting, how well they're growing. We're really interested in seeing not just how well these trees do, but how the next generation do, and how we go building those resilient, what we hope are resilient genes into the landscape. And we've fed that knowledge into a lot of the work that we're doing over in the West as well with Urardi and a lot of the restoration that we're doing over there. So being prepared, understanding what's going on across the large number of landscapes that we help manage, and thinking about mitigating strategies ahead of the moment that you need them is one of the key things that we're working on just now.
Fantastic. Well, it's to sort of finish this section, it's been a bit of a roller coaster year for us all, hasn't it? But lots to look forward to between now and our next impact report. So it'd be great to hear what each of you feel is you're getting excited about for the next 12 months and what lies ahead. So Paul, can we start with you? What's your next 12 months look like in terms of the things that get you most excited?
Probably, I guess I'll probably only speak on behalf of Yorker, still being the reserve manager for here, and it's probably infrastructure based, but it will have ecological flow-on effects, and that's after how long we've been here. Well, I've been here 14 years now, is to actually get our eastern fire break reinstated and a boundary fence all the way around. So we've got operational boundary fences. It's a really lumpy country. It's always been a bit of a pain to try and work with, and we've concentrated on our efforts in the early years to those boundaries with grazing neighbours. So hopefully towards the tail end of this year, next year, we'll actually have that fire break back in place and the boundary fence back up. And we can find ourselves really getting on top of cattle incursions as well. As much as we're obviously don't have the sort of cattle numbers that would run during an operation, that still here, they still get in. We're in North Queensland. We've got 9 kilometres of Herbert River frontage and 46 floodgates or something. So cattle coming and going are always going to be an issue. But to have that in place to allow us to play more with our own prescribed burns in that section of the property, which is difficult to manage, and to be able to manage cattle numbers and reduce any of that sort of grazing impact, will feel like a real win actually for me. It'd be good to get off that roller coaster a little bit. So that's definitely a positive. And we've got the new senior ecologist who'll be spending some time at Yorker too to keep our monitoring program happening too. So and to establish some new ones. So that's an exciting move, especially if we could do some work around critical weight range mammals. It's a little bit of a knowledge gap at the moment. So to formalise that and get that up and running will be another really significant achievement for us, I think. Thanks, Matt.
Excellent. What about you, Beck? What do you got to look forward to?
I think to follow on from what we were just saying around drawing down lots of information around climate change and making sure we're building our preparedness, our understanding and our preparedness around the landscapes. We talk a lot. We're very collaborative with lots of other conservation NGOs on a fairly consistent basis. And when I was bemoaning the lack of cohesive data and data that's easily able to be brought together so that you can understand the condition of your landscape now and the likely impacts of climate change decades into the future, everybody said, yep, us too. So we pulled together a large consortium of conservation NGOs, state and federal government representatives, and Melbourne University. So Brendan Mintle from Melbourne University is co-leading this with Bush Heritage, and we're just hitting our strides. It's a really exciting time in the project. We have amazing foundational support from the Ian Potter Foundation, for which we're incredibly grateful, and we're just absolutely have so much enthusiasm for the project, everybody working together to get a bedrock of information to understand how we best prepare across Australia, across the entire Australian landscape. What are the impacts of climate change going to be, and how do we all prepare for that, and how do we pull together our different conservation approaches in a mosaic so that we have the best possible impact, from the policy level to working on the ground to all of the different kinds of approaches that we take to make sure that our landscapes are genuinely as resilient as they possibly can be.
Fantastic. And what about you, Heather? You're at the helm of a wonderful organisation. What do you see ahead for us?
Yeah, look, it's a phenomenal organisation, and it's a one big giant family. It's not just the 150 staff, the 1,000 volunteers, it's all the 40,000 supporters and partners and people we engage with. So next month is our 30th anniversary, and it's amazing when we reflect back of where we came from 2 little properties in the Liffey Valley and a vision of a small number of people to where we operate now across 11 million hectares, half the size of Victoria. So what I'm really looking forward to is the fact that our amazing donors and supporters have given us the opportunity to really deepen and double our impact now between now and 2030. So I'm looking forward to more staff joining the team, more volunteers, deepening the work that we do both on reserves and across the Aboriginal partnerships area, and looking at how we can expand that work, a bit like ripples in a pond, how we expand that work across our neighbours, other landowners, and really have that amazing impact that we know we need to have given the challenges of climate change and competing land use, etc. So I'm really excited about the future. It's going to be phenomenal. I can see, way more people out in the landscape from lots of different backgrounds, all contributing to protect the fantastic species that we have in Australia, whether it be everything from, plains wanderer, which is sort of like that size, to, the phascogales or the smallest ant, as long as it doesn't bite me, to the tallest trees, is having, more people out there doing that work across bigger landscapes. It's going to be phenomenal.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for your thoughts on that. I know for me personally, the most exciting thing is if I can get out in the bush and actually come out and visit some of these places. And I'm sure that's true for many of the supporters who are on the call today, that the biggest excitement is actually being able to get out there and see it and not be constrained by a 5 kilometre or 10 kilometre limit, or whichever you happen to have in place. So that leads us up to question time. We've had a few come through. Heather, you answered one of the questions in that last conversation around how many staff we have, which is approximately 150, isn't it? And the questioner also asked, what sort of jobs do they do? And I think you've got a really good example on the panel today. You've got the executive management team who run the organisation really effectively. And you've got the science and conservation team that Rebecca's looks after, which have a whole team of ecologists, which are the really smart brains that determine what we should be doing, what we've got. You know, lots of on-ground research we're still discovering new species. We found a new snake at our Tarcutta Hills Reserve recently called the Dwyer snake. So it's lovely to find new species popping up. And we've got the field staff who, the rugged, Paul's not a good example of this because most of them have beards if they're male. But nevertheless, we have some wonderful field staff, bearded or otherwise, male and female. And they do all the great work for us out there. And then a whole bunch of head office staff who do the marketing and fundraising and help look after the wonderful supporters we have. And I have the pleasure of being in that team. So that was answering that first question. Paul, there was a couple of questions on the redfin blue eye, which was, what's the predatory fish you're trying to keep out? And I think one of the supporters actually gave the answer in the chat, but if you'd just like to talk a bit more, and linked to that was that question about genetics, and is there anything lost by having captive populations and reintroducing them, or does it affect the genetics at all?
Sorry, Matt, you warbled out there a little bit. I'll answer the first part. Yeah, Gambusia, that was correct. That's our main predatory fish. So yeah, and they really do breed well. Like a lot of ferals, they come in and breed really well and outpopulate the native species. So having areas without Gambusia have proven to be really, really effective. Yes. But I mean, the other one that we didn't speak about before, which sort of works with the containment fences, is things like feral pigs. We're running really delicate springs and delicate vegetation. So feral pig populations are the other ones that have to be managed in those areas. And even woody weeds, as much as we're talking about an aquatic environment, it is Western Queensland. So prickly acacia and Parkinsonia grow really well in that country, and it's wet, so heavily seeded, really healthy. But then those root structures end up in our waterways and in our springs as well, which are not helping us. So yeah, it's probably the other less obvious one, but certainly even the woody weed species are the other ones that are of a little bit of concern in those areas too. But Gambusia, yes, in the water is our biggest problem as far as direct predation on fish go.
And the other part of the question, I think, was another question was whether, if you have any insight into the genetics of the populations and whether they're impacted by, you know, the very small localized springs that they're in, and whether translocation and captive breeding has any effect on those genetics. Is that something we've studied yet?
That's actually just, so we're still waiting on the results on that, but that's something that UQ staff have just done just in the last couple of weeks, probably a bit more, a month ago, tail end of August. That's a comparison at least of captive bred to wild populations, just to make sure we're not dropping out genetics in the captive bred ones. And then obviously these fish can move as much as they're in springs. It's Western Queensland. It's a dry environment, but it does rain. And when it does rain, all of those areas go well underwater. So all of those fish in those springs can meet up, obviously, and breed and swap DNA. Obviously, that's a problem with Gambusia too. And that's why we put the exclusion fencing in, just to try and keep some of the flood water can come up and be an inundation event through the shade cloth. But then we don't have reinfestations from feral species as well. But apart from those ones, and there's 100+ springs, the fish within those during those wet events can certainly move around the environment as long as they make it back into the springs again as that surface water starts to evaporate.
Fantastic. And there's
Yes, I jump in and add to that, because I think this is actually a really fantastic example of what we call meta-population management, where you've got animals out in the wild, you've got animals in captivity, and there's a constant amount of the recovery team is managing all of that transfer. So we're making sure that we don't lose the genetic diversity by making sure it is in what we call insurance populations, but they're not just for the worst possible event. They're there to make sure that that genetic flow really happens. And this is just like having an extra population under really strictly controlled and protected conditions. So absolutely, we've got a lot of work going on to make sure that that genetic diversity is maintained, but the system is set up really, really well. And I think it's an excellent example of meta-population management.
Yeah, fantastic. There was a question I think is very useful because it talks to our relationships with our neighbours, and it was framed as, do we have any issues with unlike-minded neighbours, people who aren't conservationists, who aren't necessarily helpful? And I'm sure the answer to that actually is probably more useful about talking about the ones that we do influence and get involved in. But would anybody like to respond to that one?
Look, and it's a challenge. We live in an amazing community and we're all individuals, different backgrounds, different perspectives, etc. We have some phenomenal neighbours that we work really closely with and have, joint research projects with. And there are a couple in some locations which are not necessarily helpful. So in one location, which will remain nameless, every time the reserve managers go on leave, they move their cattle in. So, we have to have some forthright discussions about why that is not helpful. But I think our philosophy is to welcome the community in, and by being part of the community, most cases we can actually help bring people along with the journey. And then it means, and I've heard some amazing radio interviews from some of our pastoral neighbours being really ultra supportive of our work, because we've built those relationships over time. But hey, we're humans. Not everybody's going to get on all the time, but we work hard at it.
But we certainly do work very strongly with neighbours in all situations, don't we? Paul, I'm sure, you've been on Yorker for a good many years now, and it's essential to have those good relationships, isn't it? Whether it's fire management or working together or just helping out when someone's got a sick child.
Yeah, that's correct. And none of us manage in isolation to our neighbours. We're not managing islands, unless, of course, we're actually managing an island. So what we do or don't do can negatively affect our neighbours, and vice versa. But certainly, just speaking from my part of the country, it's generally pretty positive up here. We work well when it comes to feral species and stock management and fire. I certainly tend to end up assisting with fires most years, and vice versa when I need it. So it's quite good. We've probably got some inroads there to make to change mindsets if that's where we want to go. But certainly, I'd have to say we haven't got anyone actively working against us, and hear good positive comments third hand back through the local community too. So I think we're probably not doing too bad in this part of the world, to be honest.
Excellent. Well, I've got last question here, I think, or last couple, which perhaps I'll chuck to you, Beck, to kick off, which is, what's our stance on dingoes in the environment, which I know is always a complicated one to finish with because it's a big story, but it's linked to also, do we think that biological controls will ever be useful in controlling feral species in Australia?
Yeah, no, really good questions. I think so. And that's probably a good tie in between those two. So just like our pastoral neighbours, the vast majority of our reserves are on pastoral leases, and we have legal requirements that we abide by. We wish we didn't. Dingoes can play a really important role in the landscape, and genuinely we wish we could have that role in place across many more landscapes than we do currently because of that legislation and because of those fences. So we are, dingoes or wild dogs is actually a really good question. So there are legislative requirements to control those wild dogs on occasion, and feral dogs are a real issue. And it's figuring out how to separate the two, and you can generally only do that behaviourally. That's a really tough one. That's a tough one we have to deal with. And I think one of the services that dingoes do genuinely provide us when they're in the landscape is managing the pests. So they absolutely control and compete with foxes and cats, which are our biggest invasive predator species really across the country. And we've been working with Andy Shepherd and his crew at CSIRO to start looking more and more about effective biological controls. And Australia is the home of so much innovation around biological control. And I think one of the most interesting things that has emerged over the last little while and is in testing and in development and in discussion is called gene driving, where you can modify the genes of a source pool of animals and then release them into the environment. And they've already done that with mosquitoes to make them not carry malaria. So you still have mosquitoes in the landscape, but that you do not catch malaria from them, even though malaria is in the area and it would ordinarily be carried by the mosquitoes. One of the things we're thinking about, particularly with rabbits, is where you modify the genes so that all of the offspring would be male. And over a number of generations, you get a significant reduction in the population overall. And it's not cruel. You know, the animals, you're not killing the animals, you're just only having males born so that the reproductive capacity of the population overall is significantly reduced. It's actually, and the other thing is to think about it from an ecological point of view. Through myxomatosis and Khaleesi and various other control mechanisms, we understand what happens to the landscape when you take rabbits out. And it doesn't collapse. It does quite well. Rabbits drive a lot of vegetative destruction and soil disruption and all sorts of things which are not good in the Australian landscape. Removing them leaves the rest of the ecosystem stable and better off. The scenario around removing cats versus foxes one at a time is actually a little bit more complicated. And that's why we're discussing rabbits more than anything else right now. And it's equally the only resolution I can see that is genuinely national, that we can release something like that doesn't cause pain or anguish and can spread by itself across the nation with very little input beyond that. So we're a long way off, both technically and I think having society understand how that's going to work and accept how that's going to work. But I am personally very excited by the prospect. Making sure that we do it the right way is going to be a great boom for Australia.
Great, thanks, Beck. And that's good forward-thinking piece to finish up with, I think. One last comment I'd like to share from the chat, which was that Dean shared that he's had plains wanderers on his property several times, which is always fantastic news. So Dean, if you'd like to tell us where you are, I'm sure that information will be very helpful to our folks who are studying the plains wanderer, and we've had them equally seen on our Bulkamata Reserve in the last year. Seen and almost run over by the person who saw them. So it was a close call, but it's one of those great stories where we discovered it, and it was because it was on the track and we nearly ran it down. So thanks for that share from Dean. Thank you to all the speakers today. Great to get an insight into what's happening around bush heritage. And to all the people who've logged on today, thanks for joining us. This is the second in our spring webinar series. Just to let you know that the next ones are going to be on Friday, the 24th of September. And that's under the Voice of the Volunteers banner. Michelle Stuke will be the host, and we're going to feature Paul Bateman, who's part of the Adventurous Volunteers down on the Murrumbidgee, south of Canberra. We call them the Weed Warriors because they basically raft down the Murrumbidgee with tools and they attack the weeds as they go. And that involves jumping in and out of icy waters and having lots of adventures on the way. So that's on Friday, 24th of September. And then on the 20th of October, on a Wednesday, I'll be hosting our president, Sue O'Connor, to discuss those 30th anniversary celebrations that Heather mentioned and look back on the 30 years of growth of this wonderful organization that we're all part of. If you've got any friends or family you think would like to join either of these, please direct them to the link that we'll put in the chat. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon. If you've got the time, I welcome you to stick around. We've got a lovely little final video with some of our favorite images from the past year, and some of the comments as we've been going through have been how good the images are. We're so fortunate to have great photographers who capture some of these moments. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and bye for now.